It is good to be with you. We are living in a period where the boundaries between truth, pressure, rumor, and power have become dangerously blurred. Stories now travel faster than armies once did, and narratives shape expectations long before events unfold. Few countries illustrate this reality more clearly than Venezuela, and few figures embody it more fully than Nicolas Maduro. In recent years, claims have repeatedly surfaced suggesting that the United States has captured, detained, or secretly removed Venezuela's president. These claims are false, yet they persist, circulate, and gain traction because they resonate with a deeper and more unsettling truth. The United States has spent years trying to break the Venezuelan state, and in doing so has normalized the idea that the physical removal of a foreign leader is not only possible, but inevitable. To understand why these stories feel plausible, we must step back and examine the long arc of U.S.-Venezuelan relations and the logic that governs great power behavior. Venezuela is not just another troubled country. It sits atop the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. It occupies a strategic position in the Western Hemisphere, and since the rise of Hugo Chavez in the late 1990s, it has openly rejected American political and economic dominance. Chavez's Bolivarian revolution was not merely a domestic political project, it was a challenge to U.S. influence in Latin America. He nationalized industries, redirected oil revenues towards social programs, built alliances with Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran, and spoke in openly anti-imperial language. From Washington's perspective, this was intolerable. When Chavez died in 2013 and Nicolas Maduro assumed the presidency, many in the United States believed the experiment would collapse on its own. Maduro lacked Chavez's charisma, his revolutionary credibility, and his political skill. The assumption was that economic pressure, internal dissent, and elite fragmentation would quickly remove him. That assumption proved wrong. And when assumptions fail in international politics, frustration often turns into escalation. The first phase of the U.S. campaign against Maduro relied heavily on economic tools. Sanctions were introduced gradually, then expanded aggressively. At first, they targeted individuals, then entire sectors, and eventually the core of Venezuela's oil economy. These measures were framed as precision tools aimed at corrupt officials, but their real impact was systemic. Oil exports collapsed. Foreign currency dried up. Inflation spiraled into hyperinflation. Ordinary Venezuelans bore the cost. From a realist perspective, this was not accidental. Economic pain was meant to translate into political pressure. Yet, even as the economy imploded and millions fled the country, the regime survived. The military remained largely loyal. The opposition fragmented. External allies stepped in. Russia provided diplomatic cover and technical assistance. China restructured debt and maintained trade. Cuba offered intelligence and security expertise. What Washington expected to be a quick collapse became a prolonged stalemate. At that point, the strategy shifted from pressure to delegitimation. In 2019, the United States recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate president. This move was extraordinary. It was an attempt to create a parallel state by declaration, to transfer control of Venezuelan assets abroad, and to signal to the military that the international community would back a transition. For a brief moment, it seemed possible. Headlines declared Maduro finished. Diplomatic recognition spread. But the moment passed. The Venezuelan state apparatus did not fracture. Guaidó's support eroded. The gambit failed. Failure breeds escalation. Soon after, the United States unsealed indictments, accusing Nicolas Maduro and senior officials of narcotics trafficking and terrorism. A multi-million-dollar reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. This was not merely symbolic. It reclassified Maduro from adversarial head of state to international criminal in the American legal imagination. From that moment on, the idea that he could be captured ceased to be hypothetical in the public mind. It became conceptually normalized. In intelligence terms, this is a dangerous step. Once a leader is publicly labeled a criminal, compromise, negotiation, and restraint become politically toxic. The conflict becomes personal, the stakes become absolute, and narratives begin to run ahead of reality.
This environment produced a series of bizarre and reckless episodes, most notably the 2020 mercenary incursion known as Operation Gideon. A small group of armed men attempted to land on Venezuela's coast with the apparent aim of capturing Maduro and triggering an uprising. The operation was amateurish, poorly funded, and quickly crushed, but its symbolic importance was immense. It demonstrated that the idea of seizing the Venezuelan president was not confined to internet fantasies. It had entered the realm of attempted action. From that point onward, rumors became inevitable. In a world saturated with leaks, anonymous sources, and algorithm-driven outrage, the distinction between what has happened and what feels like it should have happened erodes. Social media accounts fabricate documents, videos are edited, headlines are copied and altered. And because the United States has a long history of intervening in Latin America, many people assume that if such a capture were possible, it would have already occurred quietly. But realism demands sobriety. The United States has not captured Nicolas Maduro because doing so would carry enormous costs. Venezuela is not isolated in the way Panama was when Manuel Noriega was seized. It is integrated into a network of rival powers. Any direct action against Maduro would risk confrontation with Russia, China, and Iran. It would shatter remaining norms of sovereignty and could destabilize the entire region. The risks outweigh the benefits. Instead, Washington has pursued what might be called strategic suffocation. The pressure never fully lifts. Negotiations open and close without resolution. Sanctions are adjusted but never removed entirely. Elections are demanded but never accepted as legitimate. The objective is not decisive victory, but long-term attrition. In this context, the myth of capture functions as a psychological weapon. It reinforces the perception that Maduro is living on borrowed time, that resistance is futile, and that collapse is inevitable. From Maduro's perspective, this has produced a siege mentality. Power has become increasingly centralized. Loyalty is rewarded over competence. Security services are empowered. Dissent is treated as treason. This is not unique to Venezuela. It is the predictable behavior of a regime that believes it is under permanent existential threat. External pressure hardens internal repression. The state becomes less flexible, not more. For the Venezuelan people, the consequences are devastating. They are caught between a government that prioritizes survival and an external power that prioritizes pressure. Sovereignty becomes an abstract concept when medicine is scarce, wages are worthless, and families are separated by migration. Yet from the perspective of great powers, human suffering is often treated as collateral rather than decisive. Internationally, Venezuela has become a case study in the limits of American power. The United States can impose enormous economic damage, but it cannot easily force political outcomes when a regime has external backing and internal coercive capacity. This lesson has not been lost on other states. Moscow watches closely. Beijing watches even more carefully. They see that sanctions can hurt, but not always break. They see that regime change is harder than rhetoric suggests. This is where the danger of miscalculation emerges. Deterrence depends not only on capability, but on credibility and clarity. When the United States repeatedly signals that a leader is illegitimate, criminal, and dispensable, but then refrains from decisive action, adversaries may draw the wrong conclusions. They may assume hesitation reflects weakness rather than restraint. In international politics, such assumptions can be fatal. The persistence of false stories about Maduro's capture is therefore not trivial. It reflects a broader erosion of trust in official narratives. Many people assume that if something has not been confirmed, it has merely been hidden. Decades of secrecy, covert operations, and classified interventions have trained publics to believe that the truth is always delayed. In some cases, this skepticism is justified. In others, it becomes fertile ground for disinformation. Information warfare thrives in this environment. Actors with political agendas exploit ambiguity. They seed rumors to test reactions. They flood channels with conflicting claims until certainty collapses. In such conditions, the mere repetition of a claim can create belief. Reality becomes secondary to plausibility. Yet the strategic reality remains unchanged. Nicolas Maduro is still in Caracas. His government still controls the state. The United States still applies pressure. The stalemate endures. And as long as it does, the risk of escalation remains. We must also consider the broader global context. The international system is becoming more multipolar. U.S. dominance is no longer uncontested. Sanctions are increasingly circumvented. Alternative financial systems are developing. Alliances are shifting. In such an environment, prolonged coercion can backfire. States under pressure adapt. They become more resilient, more suspicious, and more willing to align against the source of pressure. For the United States, Venezuela is no longer just about democracy or oil. It is about credibility. If Washington backs down, it appears weak. If it escalates, it risks chaos. This is the classic trap of overextension. Every move carries cost, and the room for maneuver shrinks. The myth of capture also reveals something deeper about political psychology. People crave decisive endings. They want villains defeated and stories resolved. A long, grinding stalemate offers no catharsis. It breeds frustration. Rumors fill that emotional gap. They offer a sense of closure, even if it is false. But history teaches us that unresolved conflicts rarely end cleanly. They fester, they mutate, they produce unintended consequences. Venezuela's crisis has already reshaped